Hi, in this video we're going to compare the deep research mode from different AI providers, starting from ChatGPT, then Grok, then Perplexity and DeepSeek. We'll see how the responses produced by the deep research mode are different in all of these providers, what use cases they're good for, and how to use them in order to get the best results. In order to do that, we'll be using an app that I developed that's called InfraNodus that visualizes a text as a knowledge graph, so we can see the underlying structure of the responses that we're getting. And we can analyze how connected or dispersed it is, which will give us a really good insight into the quality of response. Because, for example, as you can see here, the response that was produced by ChatGPT, for instance, is focused with low modularity, whereas the response produced by Grok, for example, will be a little bit more biased, a little bit more interconnected, as you can see here. And then the response that is generated by Perplexity, for instance, is more dispersed. So that gives us an understanding of how the model actually thinks. Because, for example, if we want a response that is more creative, then maybe we want to look into Perplexity. Whereas if we want something to be really focused on one topic, then in this case, Grok could be more interesting. I will also show you how you can analyze the actual thinking process that some of the deep research modes reveal. Like, for instance, DeepSeek reveals the thinking process here, so you can analyze also how the model thinks and see how it's different from each other. So that can be also pretty useful if you would like to get a glimpse into how they're actually doing the research and what they're better for. If you don't know what deep research mode is, I'm just going to demonstrate it here. So basically, normally when you ask something to a model, it's going to generate a response based on its training data, and that's usually outdated. So when you turn on deep research mode, what happens is that model initiates some kind of agentic workflow under the hood, which is shown here in the right tab in ChatGPT, for instance, and it just goes online and searches for any relevant data that would be useful to answer your original prompt. So here it shows us that it's thinking about what it should look for, and then it uses a search agent that opens certain websites, as we can see here, retrieves information from them, then augments the original prompt with them, and then you get a really nice and detailed response like that. So the quality of the response that you get is much higher. It's also much more up to date, much more detailed, and it's going to save you a lot of time. It's a really good mode, and even though it costs $200 in ChatGPT, I find it quite useful, especially if you need to look into some legal stuff that can actually save you a lot of money, or if you're thinking about finance, or if you're doing scientific research, for instance, because it basically does all this search for you and then generates a really nice summary, and then you know it's also very up to date. So I really like using it. And all the deep research modes and all the tools, they work more or less similarly. So for example, in Grok, you also have the same thing, that it shows you that it's actually going online. Here, the advantage is that it's also sometimes using tweets, because it has access to tweets. So that can be interesting if you want some more up-to-date data that's based on the conversations that people are having, not only on the websites. And then in Perplexity, it also uses websites. Sometimes it also finds YouTube videos. So then it generates also quite nice responses as well. And we're going to look into all of them. With DeepSeek, it's a little bit different, because even though it has Deep Think and the search mode, when it's revealing you the thinking process, it doesn't actually show whether it's crawling something online or not. So it's not so clear whether it's going on the internet or not. I think they will add it soon if it's not doing it yet, but still the responses are quite detailed and nice, and we're going to compare them all. So let's get into ChatGPT first. Here, I ask a question: how does deep research mode work in AI chatbots? I ask this question to all the different systems, to Grok, to Perplexity and DeepSeek, and then it generated some results. ChatGPT took about 5 minutes to answer this question. It shows me that it looked through the 23 sources that I can see on my right, and now when I have this response ready, I can analyze it with InfraNodus and see the underlying knowledge graph structure. So let's look into it. We will see that the answer is really focused on the topic of research, obviously, because it's deep research mode. But we can also see that there is a cluster here, and in InfraNodus, the words that belong together in the same context, they're shown with the same color and are closer to each other on the graph. So you have this really nice intuitive way of seeing what ideas co-occur together in the context. So for example, here we see that it's talking about information AI, And then there's this red cluster on training data, bias and illusion. That's quite interesting, and objectivity as well. By the way, we can even click on objectivity and illusion and see in which context the model is actually mentioning it. So here it says that AI chatbots inherit biases from both their training data and the context they retrieve. Bias in training data means the model might already have skewed perspectives on certain topics, and bias in online sources can compound the issue. And deep research mode might give an illusion of objectivity by citing sources, but if those sources are biased, then the final response would be not so precise. So here it's actually a pretty good bit because it's almost critiquing itself, which I really like. And this response was actually found somewhere in text here, and we can find it if we look for it in the answer here. So this is actually pretty interesting because we can see that in this case, for instance, it was talking about bias, not only about how it works. If we go into Grok and we perform the same analysis, by the way, I'm using the InfraNodus extension for the browser, and it works with all major AI chatbots, so you can use it on any conversation, not only in deep research mode. It's actually pretty useful because it can show you the structure of this conversation, and then you can also use the built-in AI to generate prompts. I'm going to show you how to do that. But here I can see that also it's focusing on research and actually on ChatGPT, funnily enough, mentioning its competitor. Fact-checking, AI also we have here. Perplexity, so it's talking about the different tools, but it's not actually talking so much about bias. Let's see if there is any mention of bias here. So I'm going to type in bias here. No, there's nothing about bias here. So that's interesting. It kind of missed this topic, and it actually correlates with the insight that InfraNodus is giving us that the response of Grok is more biased. So it's a little bit more focused on just the main topics, main concepts, such as research, and in this case, it's ChatGPT, AI, query, and actually finance also. All right, so we can actually see what it's talking about when it's saying finance. So we can click finance and then see all the connected nodes, research. So I can click here, research, and then open AI. So it's kind of talking about the specifics of how it's used. Let's look at the context and see that this mode been designed for thorough, precise research in fields like finance. So it's more about applications of where it can be used. Whereas the response that we got from ChatGPT was much more technical and touched upon more topics. We can actually see all the topics listed here. So we can also see how much influence there is in every topic. So here, ChatGPT answer is giving us 44% influence in AI queries, information tools 36%, 13% data accuracy, legal efficiency. Whereas in Grok, let's look at the structure, more than half of influence in AI research. So you see it's more focused and biased on one specific concept, which kind of tells me that I would prefer to use ChatGPT because the response is going to be much more diverse. But perhaps also what's good about Grok is that it's just going to be focused on the actual topic it's exploring. Perplexity is different because when I perform the same analysis using the InfraNodus extension in Perplexity and I visualize the graph, in fact it's dispersed. It's much more dispersed than the rest of the tools. And this is because it's mentioning many different topics. I think it's listing more tools. It's talking about the different policies. For instance, here there's something about scalability, policies, also adverse effects. So it's actually providing a very diverse answer. And perhaps if I want to explore the topic without going into too much detail or without zooming in, I would use Perplexity to get like a general field overview of the main ideas. Let's look at the DeepSeek result. So we will visualize the graph using the InfraNodus extension. We can also see that it's quite dispersed, but it's also kind of less detailed. I think the answer is shorter, and that's probably because it didn't really get to research so much information. And here you see it's focusing more on data, which is pretty interesting because no one was giving so much importance to data. So we can actually click on those nodes, data knowledge. We can see in which context it was used. So it was talking about internal knowledge and how it's combining it with fresh external data. That's what I just mentioned when I was explaining how it works. We can also click summary, and then the built-in AI will generate a summary for these nodes. So what is the context where those two topics are mentioned in the response? And here it's talking about how it's integrating pre-trained model knowledge with the current external data, which is a pretty good summary of how deep research mode works, actually, that it's taking pre-trained knowledge and then it combines it with the current data that it just found online. So in fact, what I like here is that while the answer is dispersed and much shorter, it kind of touches upon the main ideas and it explains to me how it works. So I would say that I would use DeepSeek if I'm not so into getting the latest possible result, but if I just want to get an overview, but if I want to make sure that this overview covers all the different topics, because even here I can already see that it's talking about NLP, for example, so the specific technical tools that are used to actually conduct this research. So it's pretty good. I like the results in DeepSeek as well, and the fact that it's free also makes it very interesting. And based on this kind of initial overview, I would say that if I just want to get a general view of the topic, a high-level overview, I would go into DeepSeek probably. If I don't need up-to-date information, if I just want to kind of get started, then if I want to really focus on the main idea, like what I'm asking about, so for example here, deep research, I'm going to use Grok. And if I want really detailed response, I'm going to use ChatGPT. And Perplexity is pretty good because it gives me also very diverse response. I would put Perplexity and DeepSeek next to each other and probably combine them together to get first like a very wide understanding of the topic. And then I would go into ChatGPT to research it in more detail. Grok to me is a bit too focused on a specific idea. That's if I really want to get like the final answer, the final result. Another thing that I can do with this approach is that once the response is generated and I understand what the content is about on the surface level, I can now remove the most important ideas. For example, I can select research and remove it from the graph, and then the whole graph metrics will be recalculated, and InfraNodus will show me what sort of pops up underneath. So when I remove the obvious terms such as information, AI, because I know that these ideas will be on the surface on that particular response, I will see what other concepts are hiding underneath, right? So then I will see that it's talking about Googling, data, the internet, search algorithms, bias, illusion, privacy. So all these latent topics are coming to the surface, and it's pretty interesting because then I can explore it in more detail. You see, I can, for example, reveal here that the word bias and biases and bias are quite prominent as well. So this whole cluster actually is pretty interesting. I can actually click on that cluster here, bias awareness, and I can ask InfraNodus to summarize it for me. So everything in the response that relates to bias, what it's talking about. And here it's talking about how it inherits biases from the training data and online sources. No other answer provided that, and I find that is a very good point in favor of ChatGPT. If you want to touch upon the topics that no one else is talking about, probably ChatGPT mode is better, more expensive, takes longer, but you will be sure to touch upon very specific subjects that are still quite important to the overall structure of the response. Let's go into Grok and remove the top layer of nodes here. So we can actually do that by clicking on that button, and then it's going to remove the top nodes and reveal what's hiding underneath. As you can see, once we remove the main ideas, research, ChatGPT, and AI, the structure is very dispersed. It's almost too dispersed. It's kind of all over the place a little bit. So it kind of looks like Grok gave us just some statements, but it didn't go into them too much. So it just mentioned some tools, some uncertainties, calibration, engineering, science, but it didn't go into detail. So far, I have to say it's my least favorite response because I find it a little bit superficial and it's talking too much about the tools. But if you want to actually learn about the different tools that do that, it could be interesting. I think it's more how actually Twitter is, X, that people on X like to talk about the different tools, they use workflows. So maybe if you want a kind of more practical response without getting too much into the detail of how something works, perhaps it could be interesting for you. And then in Perplexity, when we remove the top layer of nodes, let's see what's hiding underneath. The structure is still quite interconnected, but less so. I like this adverse event and system. Let's see what was the context where it was used. So during a medical literature review, the system might extract dosage tables from PDFs correlate them with adverse event reports and flag statistical anomalies. So that's like a very practical, specific use case for medical applications. It's pretty interesting. And then we also have another one on analysis and hybrid analysis and expert analysis. So that's also something interesting because we see that it's talking more about use cases. It's more practical than ChatGPT. So just to give you an overview once again, ChatGPT was very in-depth, very interconnected structure, touching upon all the different subjects. Grok was very focused on research, AI, and ChatGPT here. Once we removed them from the graph, we saw that it's focused more on the different tools and listing the tools that you can use to do that. Perplexity is also quite dispersed, less so than Grok, but still quite dispersed and talking about the different topics. And here it's more talking about the different use cases and applications, as I can see from the graph. And DeepSeek, let's see when we remove the top concepts, kind of gets really dispersed and just kind of gently touching upon the different clusters. But as you can see, they're not so interconnected. So that means that there is maybe a lack of coherence, and we would have to prompt the model more and more to kind of connect all those different clusters of ideas together. Could be interesting actually if I wanted to write something creative and to use the model to stimulate my own thinking. Then probably I would use DeepSeek just to kind of get into it and then start thinking myself. If I want tools, I would use Grok. If I wanted use cases, I would use Perplexity. And full depth review, still ChatGPT is the champion here. One last thing I want to show is that you can actually use the structure to generate interesting prompts from this conversation. So for example, here I identify the structure, I remove the top nodes, and then what I can do is I can go into gaps and ask the system to identify the gaps in the response which are not bridged yet. And once I find something interesting, for instance, here we have data accuracy and market insights. They're connected but not so well connected. So I'm going to ask the built-in AI and InfraNodus to generate a research question that would bridge those two topics together. And then I can use this research question to ask another question to my ChatGPT model. So here it's going to be, how does the integration of AI-driven research tools capable of evaluating data accuracy and mitigating misinformation risk enhance investment risk assessments in financial markets by analyzing diverse sources like documents and news articles? So that's quite interesting because now I'm going to ask it how it can be applied to studying the financial data and how I can use it, for example, to get some investment advice. So that can be pretty interesting as well. And I think ChatGPT usually sometimes kind of stops thinking here, which is a little bit annoying. So it's some kind of bug they have in the system. I sometimes have to reload the whole conversation and then ask this question again. You see, something went wrong. And then it's going to generate a response for me. But because it's in O1 mode, it's going to take quite some time and it's going to generate a response. But in general, it's a really good approach because this visualization allows you to find what's missing inside this text and then to generate the new prompts that would make the model go a little bit deeper and connect the ideas more and more. And this is especially useful when you get dispersed answers like this one, because your intention, in order to make it more coherent, you want it to be more connected. So this is exactly what this gap analysis does. You specify the gaps and then you ask InfraNodus to generate a question, and then it generates a question that bridges those gaps, and then you can copy that question, paste it into Grok, and then it will force Grok to connect all those disjointed clusters together and make the response more coherent and have you explore the stuff that it's actually missing. So then the resulting graph structure will be more interconnected than before, which can actually be pretty interesting. You see, now it's much more interconnected, and actually diversity is now optimal because it connected those clusters that were not connected. So this is how you could also use this approach. Now, for those of you who already use InfraNodus, you will notice that we have this double brackets here, wiki links, next to the concepts, and this is because we're using a special new mode in the InfraNodus extension that extracts the entities from the text. It's not just analyzing the words, but entities, so you can actually select it here in text processing that you want to work with entities. But if you would like a more granular graph, you can use words. And then when you analyze the graph, again, it's actually going to use the words to perform this analysis. So it's not going to extract entities anymore, but it's going to be individual words. So the graph will be more detailed. It's going to be much more information on the graph. But the advantage is that the AI model can actually generate better responses like this because it has better context. And you can also run the same analysis using the words as well, not only entities. And then when you use the actual words, when you select them, for instance, and you try to find them in the context, then you can also use the locate button and scroll to the parts of the text where they're mentioned because it's not rewriting the actual statements. So this is how it would work. You can try it out on infranodus.com. Let me know what you think about it. And also if you have any questions and what your impressions are from all these different deep research modes that we have available to us now. Thank you.